For the very first time in over 4 years of relentless, brutal warfare, a sudden, almost eerie quiet has settled over the destroyed cities of Ukraine. Imagine the scene, right? Dawn is breaking over shattered concrete, but instead of that familiar, terrifying roar of artillery, there's just the wind. Families who have spent years hiding underground or tentatively listening to a silence they honestly haven't known since the invasion first began. In this explainer, we're diving deep into a monumental and completely unexpected geopolitical event, a sudden 3-day ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. We're going to look at the forces that brought this massive war machine to a temporary halt and ask the question the whole world is whispering right now. Is this real?
The guns have suddenly fallen silent. I mean, for over 4 years, this entire region has been defined by absolute kinetic destruction. Entire towns literally erased. Front lines moving by mere inches, but at the cost of thousands of lives. So to have this abrupt suspension of fighting, a complete halt to the kinetic activity, it's profoundly unsettling. It creates this heavy, incredibly tense atmosphere. It's a momentary suspension of violence that leaves soldiers sitting in their trenches, staring across no man's land, waiting for a trap. They're left wondering if this fragile quiet will last the next hour, let alone 3 days.
And that brings us to the profound human element of this pause. 2,000. The sheer scale of the humanitarian relief woven into this political deal is just staggering. We're talking about a massive prisoner swap. 1,000 Ukrainian prisoners and 1,000 Russian prisoners are literally being pulled back from the absolute brink. These are men and women who, frankly, likely expected to die in captivity, and suddenly they're finding themselves on buses heading home. It's a massive, incredibly complex, logistical, and emotional operation, unfolding right in the middle of a frozen war zone. Okay, so let's talk about the sound of this silence and the fragile relief it brings. Because you see, we really can't look at the politics without looking at the grim, on-the-ground reality of how this ceasefire actually feels. The silence might be welcome, but the suffering, that hasn't stopped. Right now, it's the dead of winter. The electrical infrastructure in Kyiv, and really across all of Ukraine, has been heavily targeted and destroyed by Russian strikes. So you have civilians sitting in the freezing cold, completely in the dark. There's this deep, agonizing psychological exhaustion taking hold. For the people shivering in their homes right now, this temporary relief, it almost feels like a mirage. The silence is incredibly heavy with anxiety because everyone is asking the exact same thing. What happens when those 72 hours are up? To understand exactly how we got to this fragile moment, we need to shift our focus behind the scenes. We need to look at the high-stakes political maneuvering, the real art of the deal here. The underlying motivation becomes crystal clear when you look at the Ukrainian leadership. President Volodymyr Zelensky released a truly poignant statement. He said, "Red Square is less important to us than the lives of Ukrainian prisoners who can be brought home." He's directly prioritizing human life over symbolic military defiance. But, importantly, it comes with a condition. Zelensky made it very clear that he expects the United States to act as the guarantor here, to hold Russia fully accountable to the terms of this incredibly delicate agreement. And the United States is deeply, deeply involved. Just look at what President Donald Trump stated. Hopefully just the beginning of the end of a very long, deadly, and hard-fought war. Now, this ceasefire didn't just materialize out of thin air. President Trump publicly stated that he personally made the direct request to both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Zelensky to broker this deal. So what we're looking at is a massive, top-down diplomatic intervention from the incoming American administration. Let's trace exactly how fast this happened because this timeline really reveals the intense pressure behind closed doors. Just a week and a half ago, President Trump and his nominee for Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, began speaking with their Russian counterparts. Fast forward to earlier this week, U.S. negotiators met with the Ukrainian team. Interestingly enough, Russia actually rejected an initial ceasefire proposal from Ukraine earlier in the week. Yet, despite that breakdown, the pressure continued, culminating today in this sudden, totally unprecedented 3-day ceasefire and that 2,000-person prisoner swap. It's literally a fragile scaffolding of peace, built in just a matter of days. But we have to ask the obvious question, why now? The timing here is deeply unsettling, creating this strange, tense dynamic. There is an extreme, frankly terrifying juxtaposition unfolding right now. On one side, you have Moscow. They're currently celebrating Victory Day, which is one of Russia's most intensely militaristic and nationalistic holidays. The pomp, the massive military parades rolling through Red Square, the sheer display of power, it's all proceeding as normal. Now look at the other side, Kiev. In Ukraine, the anxiety is extreme. I mean, the fear is palpable. Intelligence and military analysts on the ground are terrified that Russia is actually using this 72-hour window, perfectly timed with their military holiday, mind you, to simply stockpile missiles. The overwhelming dread in Kiev is that the very second this ceasefire ends, a massive, retaliatory winter slaughter will just rain down from the sky. To really grasp why both of these completely exhausted nations finally sat down at the negotiating table, we have to look at the underlying realities. We have to look at how the war economy is shifting. You see, a stark contrast in shifting momentum is dictating the entire battlefield right now. Ukraine is facing a truly terrifying strategic constraint. They are running dangerously short on vital Patriot air defense missiles. And why is that? Well, because the U.S. recently burned through 800 Patriot missiles in a single day defending against Iran. Basically, Ukraine's shield is cracking. On the flip side, Russia's economy, which was frankly on the verge of collapsing under the immense weight of the war, has suddenly been rescued. A recent U.S. sanctions waiver on Russian oil has drastically eased supply pressures, meaning billions of dollars are suddenly flowing right back into the Kremlin's war economy. So both sides are facing massive, shifting pressures that actually made a pause mutually beneficial, even if it's for entirely different reasons. But understanding the battlefield doesn't necessarily mean we understand the mind of the enemy. The Kremlin remains an absolute black box. This is the haunting question that literally keeps global intelligence agencies awake at night. What is actually happening inside Vladimir Putin's inner circle? We know there are rumors of extreme isolation. We know he's instituted these massive, elaborate security protocols to physically insulate himself. But honestly, from the outside looking in, we are essentially guessing in the dark about the true stability and the real intentions of the Russian leadership. And that lack of knowledge is incredibly dangerous, mostly because of our known unknowns. There's rampant speculation out there about the loyalty of former military head Sergei Shoigu, especially now that he's out of that office. We see Putin's extreme physical insulation, which strongly hints at regime paranoia. But more importantly, just look at our track record here. Western intelligence completely missed the initial 2022 invasion. Go back even further, we missed the fall of the Soviet Union. And even recently, during this very war, U.S. officials were kept awake by totally unreliable intelligence suggesting Putin was about to use a tactical nuclear weapon. We really have to humbly admit that our view of the Kremlin is deeply flawed. We simply do not know what they're planning next. Which brings us to the agonizing climax of this whole situation. Are we looking at peace or just a pause? The clock is literally ticking.
The timer is currently running on a 72-hour agreement. When that timer hits zero, what happens? Is this the beginning of peace, or only a brief pause before another escalation? That is the central, chilling question we all have to grapple with right now. On one hand, 2,000 human beings have been saved from the abyss, and opposing leaders have successfully negotiated through intermediaries. That is a real crack in the ice. But on the other hand, the war machines are still out there. They're just idling, resupplying, and waiting.
After 4 years of destruction, the world may finally be witnessing the first fragile crack in the war machine. But history has shown that silence on the battlefield does not always mean peace. Sometimes it's just the deep breath a nation takes before plunging right back into the fire. As families in Ukraine sit in the freezing dark tonight, listening to the agonizing absence of artillery, they know all too well that tomorrow the sky could fall all over again.